In my opinion, the battles over birth control and Planned Parenthood are primarily neither political nor religious. This is an issue of equality for women. This is an issue of women's rights. Planned Parenthood is the most important private provider of reproductive health care for women in the United States. If a woman makes a unilateral decision to bring pregnancy to term, and the biological father does not, and cannot, share in this decision, he should not be liable for 21 years of support. Autonomous women making independent decisions about their lives should not expect men to finance their choice. Opera is the most complete art form. It includes drama, acting, technology, lighting, art, the sets, dance, and the epitome of the human voices. But mostly, go for the glorious music. The arts are crucial to the life of every community. After Roe v. Wade, when the U.S. Supreme Court legalized abortion in 1973, I thought the national conversation about abortion and birth control would be over. It was not. No matter what is happening in life or in the world, war, natural disaster, poor health, pain, the death of loved ones, if existence is filled with art, music, and literature, life will be fulfilling, a joy. Asked to give advice to a 13-year-old girl about how to lead her life, I say find something you love to do. The goal shouldn't be accumulating money. It might be making changes in the world or in your country. When Carmen premiered in 1875, it was panned by the critics. It survived 45 performances. It was called a musical and moral outrage. After Bizet died, at age 37, Carmen became wildly popular. If you believe in your creation, and the rest of the world is laughing or yelling, boo, don't give up. During the 19th century struggle for women's rights in America, many saw a competition between rights for Black people and those for women. In the 1950s in the United States, few music lovers were listening to chamber music. Daddy played Bach and Haydn on our phonograph for me. Not only did I become familiar with the form, he discussed the concerti. My own head start. My own head start. Operas elucidate, in a way sometimes absent in other theatrical productions, the very human fact that in every hero, there is a thread of duplicity. In every villain, there is another side to consider. We don't have to like him or her, but we are compelled to think about motivation. Patricia Nixon gave up a career to become a political wife. She rose to the pinnacle of glory and then fell to disgrace because of deeds over which she had neither control nor knowledge. The Metropolitan Opera, of course, is the gold standard in opera. The Met experience includes the huge stage, the vast audience, the elaborate sets. Anyone who saw Faust there I did knows exactly what hell is like, complete with fire, smoke, and terror. George McGovern, and I campaigned very hard for his election, was not, in the summer of 1971, a strong feminist ally, but he did come around. One year, I was a patron of a new opera. It was, to put it kindly, unpleasant to the ear. The friends I went with hated it. Keeping quiet about my contribution, I was outed when one of them, reading the program at the restaurant during dinner, saw my name. It is crucial to be healthy, for pain wipes out the possibility for pleasure, and severe pain removes the possibility of turning to the world outside the body. So we must establish the idea that it is important to look well, not to look young. At 20 and 30, We are like travelers in a foreign country, reading the guidebook to learn how to behave, to learn when the post office is open. Trivia looms important. Critical issues fade into a pastel background, unrecognized. Most of us believe that women can do what men do. The challenge is to convince employers, legislators, mothers, that men can do what women do. As any opera fan knows, lawyers and judges do not fare well in most operas. Just consider the productions of Andrea Chenier, Ida, Norma, Billy Budd, Peter Grimes, The Crucible, Lost in the Stars, The Marriage of Figaro, the Macropulos Case and Wagner's Ring Cycle. Around 1810, the theme of justice emerged in opera. Being First Lady is a full-time job. Betty Ford worked full-time and should have received a salary. Michelle Obama works full-time and should be paid. If supporters of equality for women want to vote for the best candidate, they must look to a person regardless of gender and must disregard the gender of political opponents. I enjoy practicing law too much to even contemplate retiring, but I often think about engaging in serious study of the history of art, of the intricacies of classical music. I could write a fugue, or perhaps learn to play the cello. In my opinion, right up there with free public schools, our free public library system is what makes citizenship possible, even what makes America great. Just as the Supreme Court has said that women have the right to choose whether or not to be parents, men should also have that right. In the battle between the sexes, men and women will go practically to the end of the earth in illogical, irrational ways to give each other pain. We should cease thinking about men as the enemy of children and women. I joined now on an issue of pay. When I was in school, there was no such thing as girls' athletics. As I grow older, I become more and more of a Marxist Groucho, that is, when you have lived 2/3 of your life, you know the value of a good joke. From 1961 to 1964, I was fortunate enough to work at a think tank in the Kenwood neighborhood of Chicago. As a writer and editor, I reported in a publication about the thinkers. Our offices were in a former mansion. I worked in what had been the ballroom. As I sat typing my copy, I imagined the dancers waltzing. Father's Day each year makes me grateful for what my father did for me. This has little to do with our relationship and much to do with what he taught me. Daddy was hilarious. He could take the most mundane event and tell it so that we all on the floor laughing. He trained me in the joys of humor. In 1989, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that minority set-aside programs in municipal contracts were unconstitutional. The court wondered if there were proof that people of color even want to receive municipal contracts. How did abortion and birth control impact the congressional race of Dan Maffei and Anne-Marie Bjorkel, or the presidential race between Barack Obama and Mitt Romney? I don't know, but I think the so-called social issues were front and center in the minds of voters. These issues may indeed have lost the Republicans some elections. Knowing constitutional law helps one at the opera. The trial in Billy Budd, as example, invokes the Fugitive Slave Clause of the U.S. Constitution. I was running for mayor of Syracuse, the first woman to run for mayor in our city, or in New York, and one of the first in the United States. I was known for my strong conservation plank. In 1969, the term conservation was hardly on the tip of every citizen's tongue. 59 cents. For years, I wore a button 59 cents. Many of my colleagues wore it also. The purpose was so that people would come up and ask, "What does 59 cents mean?" One could then launch into a discussion about how women working full-time in the U.S. earn 59 cents for every dollar earned by men. The censors have always had a field day with James Joyce, specifically with Ulysses, but also with his other writings. The conventional wisdom is that this is because of sexually explicit passages, and there certainly are those. I have always thought that what the critics hated and feared about Joyce is his cry for human freedom. Despite the strength of the feminist movement in the 1970s and beyond, a fable has persisted that educated women are rejected as marriage partners. Most of the well-known American feminists of the 19th century did not come out against the institution of marriage. Is it a recent occurrence that women have tried to control when and if they reproduced? Absolutely not. By 2000 BC, there was worldwide use of herbal potions to prevent pregnancy. Condoms were made from animal bladders. Opponents of legal birth control, including abortion, have tried for decades to play the race card, saying that legal abortion is racist. What they ignore is that Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. accepted the Margaret Sanger Award from Planned Parenthood in 1966. Most experiences are either sensual or intellectual. Chamber music, played by a small group so the listener can follow what each player is doing, is both. In chamber music, the audience can hear each instrument and understand and feel what the composer and the musicians have in mind as they play. Composers most identified with the chamber music form are Corelli, Vivaldi, Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven, Schubert, and, of course, Bach. Of course, Bach. If there is any one composer who gives us reason and emotion, it is Bach. Education, doing homework, is the way to lift up girls. Around the world, where girls are educated, the economy and the standard of living rise. Betty Ford and I were colleagues for years, working together for women's rights in Washington, D.C., and elsewhere in the country. First Lady has been a thankless position. Eleanor Roosevelt was brilliant and had strong views. She was criticized for her politics and for her appearance. Mrs. Roosevelt was attacked for being too involved in politics. Bess Truman was criticized for being uninvolved in politics. Over the years, the most ponderous problem for women has been that men think that men and women are very different. Another of our massive problems is that women also think that men and women are very different. Our culture is intent on taking the lines out of people's faces surgically, with costly creams, and with fear and trembling when, in fact, the opposite should be the case. As artists know, if there is anything behind a face, that face improves with age. The irony is that the more we fight age, the more it shows. Paint on a 50-year-old face brings to mind a Gilbert and Sullivan comic figure. Smooth the cheeks, and suddenly the earlobes and hands look out of place. Do we run around in October, painting the gold leaves green?